the afternoon sun falls on a plaza you will never see. The stone is warm beneath your feet, worn smooth by generations of sandals. Around you, the air carries the smell of river mud and cooking fires, the sound of a language that no one on earth speaks anymore. You are standing in a city that rose before the first Egyptian pyramid was even a dream in a pharaoh's mind. Before the ziggurats of Ur. Before the first brick was laid in Mohenjo-Daro. And yet, if you opened a textbook from 20 years ago, you would not find this city mentioned. And that is the first clue that the story you were told is incomplete. Here is what the evidence shows about the civilization that built this place. In the Norte Chico region of what is now Peru, along a stretch of desert so dry that it barely rains once a decade, archaeologists found something they could not explain. At a site called Caral, dated to roughly 2600 before the Common Era, they uncovered pyramids, not small ones. Pyramids that rose 100 feet above the desert floor. A central plaza that could hold thousands of people. An amphitheater carved with precision. And all of it built without metal tools, without the wheel, without a written language. The standard narrative says that complex civilization requires these things. Caral proves the standard narrative wrong. When you stand at Caral, you are looking at the oldest known city in the Americas. But that is not the part that changes everything. What changes everything is that this civilization did not collapse. It did not vanish in a wave of violence. It simply chose to stop building, and then it dissolved back into the landscape. The people did not die. They walked away. And they left behind something that the textbooks still cannot fully explain. A culture that built monumental architecture for 6 centuries without a single fortress, without a single weapon buried with the dead, without any evidence of organized warfare at all. Pause here. Let that land. A civilization that built pyramids, that organized labor on a massive scale, that engineered irrigation canals and storage systems for thousands of tons of food, and left not a single sign of an army. How is that possible? Every other early civilization we know left walls and spears and mass graves. But Norte Chico left only silence, and that silence is screaming a truth that most people never hear. If that truth unsettled something in you, you are exactly the kind of person who needs to stay with this story. Subscribe so you do not miss what the first loop reveals, because the implications of a civilization without armies reach far beyond this valley. And in the comments, tell me, what is one assumption you held about ancient societies that this discovery just cracked open for you? The first loop opens now. Here is the question that will carry through this entire story. What does a civilization look like when cooperation, not conquest, is the organizing principle? And what did the Norte Chico people understand that we have forgotten? To answer that, start with the place itself. The Soup Valley runs through one of the driest deserts on the planet. Less than 1 inch of rain falls here each year. You would think no city could survive, let alone thrive. But the river carried water from the Andes, and along its banks, a people learned to work together in ways that still defy easy explanation. They built underground irrigation systems that channeled water for miles. They constructed stone platforms that served as ceremonial centers, aligning them with solar and celestial events. They collected cotton from plants that grew only in this valley, cotton that would later be found in fishing nets, in clothing, in bags used to carry stones for the pyramids. When archaeologists first excavated Caral, they expected to find the usual signs of hierarchy: a palace for the ruler, a temple with rooms for priests. But the excavation director, a woman named Ruth Shady, found something else entirely. The largest structures were not palaces. They were plazas, open to everyone. The residential areas were not segregated by wealth. The living spaces of the laborers were nearly identical in construction to the dwellings of the administrators. What kind of society builds pyramids without a ruling class? That is the question that haunted Shady for years. Consider the sheer scale of what they achieved. The Central Pyramid at Caral required an estimated 3 million cubic feet of stone. Every block was carried by hand, transported from riverbeds and mountainsides, shaped with stone tools, and lifted into place without beasts of burden or mechanical advantage. And this work continued for generation after generation, with no evidence of forced labor. No remains show the kinds of stress injuries typical of slave workers in Egypt. No skeletons carry the marks of violence. This was not a society built by slaves. It was built by people who chose to build it. If you have ever felt that the history you were taught is incomplete, that there is something missing between the rise of Mesopotamia and the glory of Rome, you already know the frustration. That gap is not an accident. It is the result of a quiet bias in archaeology that treated the Americas as a backwater until recently. The Norte Chico civilization challenges that bias at the root. They did not need writing to build cities. They did not need kings to organize labor. They did not need armies to protect what they built. And that terrifies a certain kind of historian because it dismantles the entire ladder of progress that Western civilization uses to justify itself. If you have ever felt that gap in the story you were taught, you are not alone. And you are not wrong to question it. Subscribe to join a community of people who refuse to accept incomplete narratives, who dig deeper into the quiet truths that challenge established power. Drop a comment with the word ladder if you felt that same bias in your own education, and share what other gaps you have noticed. The evidence is sitting in the dusty archives of Peru. Carbon dates from the site show continuous occupation from roughly 3500 before the Common Era to 1800 before the Common Era. That is 17 centuries of stability, longer than the entire span of the Roman Empire from foundation to fall. And what did they leave behind? Not a single monument to a single ruler. Not a single god with a name that survived. What they left was a city with a plaza big enough for everyone. Now consider what the Soup Valley people were not doing. They were not trading with distant powers. No exotic goods from faraway lands appear in the excavations. They were not producing art in the way we expect. No painted pottery, no carved figurines of rulers, no elaborate jewelry. Their material culture is stark, almost austere, and yet they built on a scale that rivals anything in the old world at the same time. This is the forgotten principle, that human civilization does not require the things we think it requires. It does not require a centralized state. It does not require a priesthood. It does not require a warrior elite. It requires only a shared purpose and enough food to feed the builders. The second loop opens now. Here is the one that will stay with you after the video ends. What did these people know about organizing society that we have unlearned? And is there a cost to the way we have organized things since? Let the evidence speak. In 2001, when the dating of Caral was published in the journal Science, it shook the archaeological world. Here was a site predating the Olmecs by a full 1,500 years. Here was a city that was contemporary with the first dynasty of Egypt and the Sumerian city-states. And it was built in a desert that, by all logic, should not have supported it. The only explanation is that the people of the Soup Valley developed a system of shared labor and distributed resources that worked better than any system the Old World had at the time. Look at the layout of Caral. The city covers about 160 acres. 6 large pyramids face a central plaza. Around them, smaller residential complexes fan outward in a pattern that suggests careful planning. The buildings are aligned to the same astronomical orientation, which means the entire city was designed with a single vision. Someone, or some group, coordinated this effort. But they did so without creating a class of rulers who lived in luxury. The excavated residential areas show that every house had access to the same kind of goods, the same types of fish from the coast, the same cotton textiles, the same stone tools. This was not a communist utopia. There were differences in house size, but the gap between rich and poor was narrower than anything seen in Egypt or Mesopotamia at the same time. Now think about what that implies. The Norse word for cooperative building is dugurdur, the work of the community rising from the will of the people. In the Soup Valley, that word might have been the only law they needed. Every pyramid, every plaza, every irrigation canal was built by people who woke up in the morning and chose to contribute their labor to something larger than themselves. Not because they were forced, because they understood, at a deep level, that their survival depended on cooperation, not on hierarchy. You can feel the weight of that choice when you walk through Caral today. The desert wind carries the dust of 5,000 years. The shushupe snakes still slither through the dry riverbeds. The condors still circle overhead, watching the ruins with the same patience they have always had. And the stones still sit where the builders placed them, in patterns that tell a story no one has fully decoded. What you feel here is not the grandeur of empire. It is the quiet dignity of a people who figured out how to live together without destroying each other. But here is where the story gets uncomfortable. If the Norte Chico civilization was so successful, why did it end? The answer is not invasion. It is not climate collapse, although the desert certainly didn't get any friendlier. The evidence suggests that around 1800 before the Common Era, the people simply stopped building. The rituals stopped. The plazas emptied. The population dispersed into smaller settlements along the coast and up into the valleys. They did not die. They changed. And the question is whether that change was a decline or a choice. This is the hidden truth that most accounts miss. The Norte Chico people may have achieved what every civilization since has failed to achieve. They recognized when the cost of centralization outweighed the benefits, and they chose to decentralize. They did not fight to preserve their city. They did not build walls to keep invaders out. They simply walked away, carrying their knowledge with them into smaller communities where life was less grand but more sustainable. And in doing so, they may have been wiser than any empire builder who came after. If this resonates with you in a way you cannot quite name, you know exactly why. The world you live in is built on escalation. More production, more consumption, more infrastructure, more centralization. Every city competes to be bigger, every economy to grow faster. And in that endless race, the quiet voice of the Supa Valley, the voice that says enough is enough, has been drowned out. But the ruins are still there, and they are asking us a question we have refused to answer. Now point to the cost. When the Norte Chico people walked away from Caral, they were not abandoning civilization. They were preserving it in a different form. They took their knowledge of irrigation, of astronomy, of cotton cultivation, and carried it into new valleys. Their descendants would become the foundation for later Andean cultures, the Chavin, the Moche, the Nazca, and ultimately the Inca. The thread of their knowledge never broke, but the monumental expression of that knowledge, the pyramids and plazas of Caral, was abandoned to the desert. And that abandonment saved them. Because the alternative they avoided, was the path that every other civilization took. The path of escalation that leads to overreach, collapse, and ruin. The Assyrians built Nineveh, and it was burned. The Romans built Rome, and it was sacked. The Maya built Tikal, and it was swallowed by the jungle. But Caral was not burned. It wasn't sacked. It wasn't swallowed. It simply fell silent, layer by layer, as the desert reclaimed the stones, and the wind erased the footprints. The second loop closes now. What the Norte Chico people understood is that a civilization is not a monument. It is a way of living together. When the way of living together no longer works, the monument becomes a tomb. They chose to leave the monument behind, to keep the way of living together alive. And that is the forgotten principle, that the goal of civilization is not permanence, it is adaptability. The empires that survive are not the ones that build the biggest walls. They are the ones that know when to walk away. The first loop closes here. Cooperation, not conquest, was the organizing principle of the Supa Valley, and it worked. For 17 centuries, it worked. The question it leaves us with is not whether it worked then. The question is whether we have the courage to learn from it now. Imagine, for a moment, a world where the measure of success is not how much you accumulate, but how well you live together. Where the greatest building is not a palace, but a plaza. Where the most admired leader is not the one who conquers the most neighbors, but the one who feeds the most people. The Norte Chico people built that world, and then they let it go. Before we let that silence sink in, there is something you can do right now to anchor this story. Subscribe so that when the wind blows through the next forgotten civilization, you will be here to hear it. And in the comments, write the one thing from this video that you would be willing to walk away from if it meant the people you love could keep living well. That is the thread. Save this video and let me know what challenged you. That was 5,000 years ago. The wind still blows through the empty plazas of Caral. The stone is still warm beneath the afternoon sun, and the silence is still speaking. If you heard something in that silence that you needed to hear, let me know in the comments. What is one thing you would be willing to walk away from if it meant the people you love could keep living well? Save this video for the next time you feel like the world is moving too fast. And tell me which part of this story challenged something you believed. That is the thread that connects us across the centuries.
The past still has stories to tell.